The afternoon sun, thick with the dust of Shia village, cut a merciless path across the cracked floor of the Li family home. It illuminated Li Mingyu's small, defiant frame as she stood before her adoptive father, Li Maogan. The air was heavy with the sour scent of cheap liquor and the suffocating weight of an ultimatum. "I will not marry him," Mingyu said, her voice a low, steady tremor that betrayed the furious pounding of her heart. Li Maogan slammed his half-empty bottle onto the rickety table, the sound cracking through the tense silence. "You will do as you are told. The Zhang family is offering a bride price that will feed us for a year. Do you think your useless books will do that?" He gestured with a dismissive, grimy hand toward a small, neat stack of second-hand textbooks in the corner, her only escape. "My books will get me into university," she countered, her chin lifting. "I have a future." He let out a harsh, barking laugh that grated on her nerves. "A future? A woman's future is a husband's home. Her purpose is to bear sons and serve his family. Zhang will be your future." As if summoned, Zhang, the village chief's oafish son, shifted his bulk in his chair, a leering grin spreading across his fleshy face. He ran a greasy thumb over his lips, his eyes crawling over Mingyu's worn-out t-shirt and patched jeans as if they were fine silk. "That's right, little Mingyu. A smart girl like you should know when to stop fighting. We don't even need to wait for the ceremony. Your father has accepted the prize. Why don't you come show your husband some gratitude right now?" His gaze was predatory, a physical weight that made her skin crawl. A knot of ice and fire formed in her stomach. "I'm not your wife," she bit out, each word a shard of glass. "And I never will be." That was the spark. Li Maogan's face contorted with rage. "Insolent girl." He lunged forward, his hand raised to strike Maogan. "No." A small, frail figure darted between them. Colin, Mingyu's adoptive mother, spread her thin arms protectively, her body trembling. "Please, she's just a child. Don't do this." He shoved her aside with contemptuous ease. "Stay out of this, woman. This is about securing our survival, not coddling her foolish dreams." Colin stumbled back, her eyes filling with helpless tears, her smallness a stark symbol of her powerlessness in this house. Hundreds of miles away, in a glass and steel tower that pierced the sky, the world was a silent, air-conditioned hum. President Zhang stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the faded memory of a rural village. He wasn't seeing the sprawling metropolis below. His mind was fixed on a single, grainy photograph on his vast mahogany desk, a smiling little girl with a tiny, star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. 18 years, he murmured, the words a ghost in the cavernous office. His voice, which commanded boardrooms and moved markets, was thick with the sorrow that time had not diluted. His secretary, a model of quiet efficiency, stood a respectful distance away. "Sir, the final preparations for the Shia village project are complete. The welcome delegation is waiting." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "Our private investigators have also established a new base of operations there. Given that your daughter that she was last seen near the area, they are hopeful this new, overt presence may unearth new information." President Zhang's posture stiffened, a flicker of renewed hope warring with the familiar ache of loss. "Whatever it takes, Assistant Kim. Spare no expense. This factory is not about profit. It is about finding her." He turned from the window, his face a mask of iron resolve, but his eyes held the raw, unguarded pain of a father who had lost everything that mattered. "I will turn that entire region upside down if I have to." His arrival in Shia village was like a royal procession. A fleet of gleaming black cars, alien in the dusty, unpaved streets, rolled to a stop before the modest town hall. The local mayor and officials, their clothes stiff and new for the occasion, bowed and scraped, their faces a mixture of awe and avarice. President Jiang stepped out of his car, his imposing height and aura of immense power casting a long shadow over them all. He was a titan from another world, and his presence promised a fortune that could transform their forgotten corner of the country. President Jiang, a tremendous honor, the mayor gushed, wringing his hands. We are so grateful for your investment, for bringing such prosperity to our humble village. President Jiang gave a curt, polite nod, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated buildings and the curious, impoverished faces of the villagers who had gathered to watch. His mind wasn't on prosperity. It was on a ghost. Are you here? He thought, a silent plea sent out into the wind. Are you even alive? The scene cut sharply back to the stifling heat of the Li family home. Li Maogan, satisfied that his authority was re-established, nodded toward Zhang. She's yours now. Teach her some manners. Jiang's leering grin returned. He rose to his feet, his large frame blocking the light from the door, plunging Mingyu into shadow. He was a walking cage, and he was closing in. Come now, little wife. The fight is over. He reached for her, his thick fingers aiming to clamp down on her arm. Mingyu recalled, stumbling backward until her back hit the rough wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against its own cage. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her defiance. Colin cried out Mingyu's name. A choked, desperate sound. There was no escape. The walls were closing in, the world shrinking to this one. Terrifying moment, a brute's hand reaching for her in the dusty gloom, completely unaware that the man with the power to save her, her true father, was standing less than a mile away. The cramped living room reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap liquor. It was the smell of desperation, a scent Li Mingyu knew as intimately as her own name. Two of Jiang's thugs had her by the arms, their thick fingers digging into her biceps like clamps. Their leering grins were predatory, their breath hot and foul against her chi. Jiang, a man whose wealth was outmatched only by his vulgarity, stood by the doorway, arms crossed over his bloated stomach. Come on, little thing, he sneered, his voice a gravelly rumble. Your father made a deal. It's time to be a good wife. He gestured with his chin, and the men tightened their grip, beginning to drag her toward the door. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Mingyu's chest. Her feet scraped against the worn linoleum, a useless, frantic struggle against their overwhelming force. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Suddenly, a small, frail figure darted between them. Stop. Let her go. Colin, her adoptive mother, spread her arms wide, a tiny, defiant barrier against the brutes. Her body barely reached their chests, but her eyes, fierce and unwavering, held the fire of a lioness. She is my daughter. You will not touch her. Zhang let out a booming laugh that rattled the cheap glass trinkets on a nearby shelf. Your daughter, he mocked, looking down at Colin as if she were a piece of lint on his expensive suit. Look at you, a shriveled little gnome protecting another one. What are you going to do? Bite my ankles? The insult, a familiar sting that had followed Colin her entire life, only hardened her resolve. She stood her ground, her small frame trembling not with fear, but with righteous fury. Seeing her mother, her only protector, so viciously ridiculed, ignited a spark in Mingyu's soul. It burned through the terror, melting it away into pure, white-hot rage. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she wrenched one arm free. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the fruit bowl on the cluttered coffee table. She lunged, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth handle of a small paring knife. She spun back to face them, the blade held shakily in her hand, its tip glinting under the dim, yellow light. Get away from her, she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous tremor. Get away from us, or I swear I will use this. For a moment, There was silence. The thugs paused, their expressions shifting from amusement to mild surprise. But Jung simply chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Oh, the little mouse has claws," he taunted, taking a deliberate step forward. "Go on, then. Do it." "You don't have the guts." His men joined in, their laughter a chorus of derision that echoed in the small space, each note a hammer blow to her crumbling courage. They saw her not as a threat, but as a cornered animal putting on a final, pathetic show. Kulin's face was ashen. She dropped to her knees before Jung, her hands clasped together in a desperate plea. "Please, Mr. Jung," she begged, her voice cracking. "Please, have mercy. I gave you the dowry, everything we had. Just let her go. She's a good girl. She doesn't deserve this." Jung looked down at the pleading woman with utter contempt. "Your dowry," he scoffed, kicking disdainfully at the hem of her worn dress. "That pocket change wouldn't even cover my bar tab. You think your pathetic offering buys you a say in this?" He spat on the floor near her feet. "Know your place." From the corner of the room, where he had been watching the entire exchange with a cold, calculating gaze, Lee Mayogan finally spoke. "Enough of this nonsense," he snarled, his voice cutting through the tension like acid. He pointed a trembling, nicotine-stained finger at Mingyu. "You are not her daughter. You're a bastard girl I picked up from the gutter. Your only purpose is to pay me back for the rice you've eaten. You will marry him, and my debts will be cleared. Your happiness means nothing." The words struck Mingyu with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. A bastard girl from the gutter. The knife felt heavy, useless in her hand. Her own father, the man who was supposed to protect her, was selling her like cattle. While Mingyu was reeling from the verbal assault, one of the thugs saw his opportunity. With a contemptuous grunt, he shoved Colin hard. "Get out of the way, old woman." Colin cried out, a sharp, bird-like sound as she was thrown aside. She stumbled backward, her head cracking against the sharp corner of the wooden coffee table with a sickening thud. She collapsed onto the floor, a crumpled heap, and did not move. "Mom!" The scream was ripped from Mingyu's throat. The knife clattered from her numb fingers, forgotten. She scrambled to her mother's side, her heart pounding with a terror that dwarfed everything that had come before. A dark trickle of blood was beginning to mat in Kulin's graying hair. Her eyes were closed. "Mom, please wake up. Please," Mingyu sobbed, shaking her mother's limp shoulders. There was no response. A profound, soul-crushing despair washed over her. She had fought, and this was the price. Her mother, her kind, gentle mother, was gravely injured because of her defiance. The fight drained out of her, replaced by hollow emptiness. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the cruel faces around her. She looked up, her gaze landing on Jung, then on the monster she had called a father. Her voice was a choked, broken whisper. "I'll do it." Lee Mayogan's face showed no concern for his collapsed wife, only greedy triumph. "Good," he said, his tone devoid of any emotion. He strode over and thrust a pen and a crisp set of papers into her hands. "Sign the engagement contract." Now, Mingyu's hand trembled so violently she could barely hold the pen. Her mother's life, her own future, it all came down to the single, damning signature. She stared at the black ink, at the stark white line waiting to seal her fate. The room was silent save for her own ragged breaths and the faint, gurgling sound coming from her mother's lips. Just as the tip of the pen was about to touch the paper, a sound from outside cut through the oppressive atmosphere. It was subtle at first, but distinct. The low, powerful hum of a high-end engine, a sound utterly alien to this impoverished neighborhood. It was followed by the crisp, authoritative slam of a car door, then another. Raised voices, sharp and clear, carried on the night air. Mingyu froze, her hand hovering over the contract. Every person in the room, from the thugs to Lee Mayogan, turned their heads toward the front door, a flicker of confusion and apprehension on their faces. Something was happening. Someone was here. The splintering crack of the front door swinging open was the only sound sharp enough to slice through the cacophony of cruelty. Lee Mayogan's voice, thick with rage, died in his throat. Zhang, who had a fistful of Li Mingyu's hair, froze mid-yank, her malicious grin dissolving into a slack-jawed stare. The air in the cramped, squalid room seemed to solidify, charged with an authority it had never known. Standing in the doorway, framed like a figure from another world, was President Zhang. His tailored charcoal suit was a stark rebuke to the home's peeling paint and grimy floors. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His very presence was a physical force, a wall of silent, ice-cold power that brought the chaos to an immediate, suffocating halt. His gaze, sharp as obsidian, swept the scene. It lingered for a fraction of a second on Mingyu, taking in her tear-streaked face and the humiliating grip Zhang still had on her hair. Then, his eyes dropped to the floor where Quolin lay, clutching her bruised arm, her gentle face contorted in pain. A subtle shift in his expression, a tightening of the jaw, was the only sign of the glacial fury building within him. The temperature in the room plummeted. "What?" he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Do you think you are doing?" Lee Mayogan, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of bravado, found his voice first. "This is a family matter. This ungrateful wretch refuses to marry Mr. Wong. We are merely disciplining our daughter. Your daughter." President Zhang took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his polished Italian leather shoes looking obscene on the dusty linoleum. He stopped before Mingyu, his shadow eclipsing her. He didn't look at Lee Mayogan. He looked at Jiang's hand, still tangled in Mingyu's hair. "Let go of her." The command was spoken so quietly it was almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an execution order. Zhang flinched as if burned, snatching her hand back. President Zhang's gaze finally settled on Lee Mayogan, and the man visibly shrank under its intensity. "You will address her by her name." "Chang Wei," he paused, letting the name hang in the stunned silence. "And you will never lay a hand on her again. Because she is not your daughter. She is mine." The declaration fell like a guillotine. Disbelief, stark and absolute, washed over the faces of Lee Mayogan and Zhang. Mingyu's head snapped up, a breath catching in her throat. His daughter, Zhang Wei. The name felt alien, a label for a stranger. The world tilted, the shouting and the pain of moments ago fading into a distant buzz. All she could see was this towering man, whose face she had only seen on the covers of business magazines, claiming her as his own. That's impossible," Lee Mayogan stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "The contract is signed. The factory in Xia village." President Zhang pulled out his phone, his movements economical and precise. He didn't even glance at Mayogan. "Secretary Kim," he said into the device, his voice clipped. "Cancel the Xia village investment. All contracts. Effective immediately." He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. "As for that other piece of paper you call a contract," he said, his eyes flicking with contempt towards the crumpled document on the table, "it's worthless. Now, get out of my sight." The finality in his tone was absolute. The swift, devastating destruction of their ambitions left the Lees speechless, their world collapsing in a single, 5-second phone call. But Mingyu Zhang Wei barely registered their shock. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and the strange, terrifying hope. She looked from President Zhang's unyielding profile to her adoptive mother, still struggling to sit up. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The name, the money, the revelation it was all hers. The only reality was Qulin's pain. She rushed to her side, ignoring everyone else. "Mom, are you okay?" The sterile white of the VIP hospital room was a universe away from the grime of the Lee family home. The rhythmic, gentle beep of a heart monitor was the only sound as Jiang Wei sat by the bedside, clutching Kulin's hand. Her adoptive mother was sleeping, her face peaceful under the effects of the pain medication, and for drips slowly feeding fluid into her arm. President Jiang stood by the window, his back to them, giving his daughter space. He had orchestrated everything with silent efficiency: the best ambulance, the top floor of the city's most exclusive hospital, a team of specialists on standby. She will have the best care, he said, his voice softer now, reflecting off the window pane. Anything she needs. Anything you need. Jiang Wei didn't look up. She squeezed Hulin's hand, grounding herself in the familiar warmth. The sterile, antiseptic air of the hospital corridor did little to mask the rot of desperation clinging to Zhang and Li Meogan. Ruin was no longer a distant threat. It was a rabid dog with its teeth clamped firmly on their ankles. Their last, venomous idea had taken root in this bleak hallway, outside the room where Quolin was being treated for exhaustion. A doctor's polite term for a spirit crushed by years of their abuse. Her soft heart is the only thing left to us, Meogan hissed, his face a mask of predatory greed. Wei may be a Jiang now, but she was raised by that woman. We just need to remind Quolin of her place. Zhang nodded, a cruel smirk twisting her lips. A reminder that she is nothing without us. They pushed into the room. Quolin sat on the edge of the bed, her small frame looking even more fragile in the oversized hospital gown. Her only comfort was a small, worn photograph she clutched in her hands, the only one she had of herself and the young Jiang Wei, their smiles wide and genuine, captured in a rare moment of peace. Still clinging to that scrap of paper, Zhang sneered, snatching it from Kulin's grasp. No, please, that's all I have of her. Kulin's voice was a weak, trembling plea. Meogan produced a lighter, its metallic click echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. Memories are for people with a future, he said, a flame flaring to life. He held the corner of the photograph to the fire. The door swung open again, admitting Chujinga and her father, his face a portrait of smug satisfaction. Jinga's eyes, cold and sharp, landed on the scene with amusement. Well, spring cleaning, are we? She drawled, a voice dripping with disdain. Getting rid of old trash. She sauntered over to Quolin, looking down her nose. Did you really think a phoenix would stay in a chicken coop? She's Jiang Wei now. She's probably forgotten what her dwarf mother even looks like. Kulin's heart shattered. The words were poison, seeping into the cracks of her deepest fears. She watched, horrified, as the flame licked at the photograph. The image of Wei's smiling face began to blacken and curl. A choke sob escaped her lips as she lunged forward, clawing desperately at Meogan's arm. Please, I'm begging you. He shoved her back onto the bed with contemptuous ease. The antagonists watched, their faces illuminated by the flickering pyre of Kulin's last treasure. Their laughter was a cruel, echoing chorus, confident in the belief that money and status had already severed the bond they were now so symbolically incinerating. The acrid smell of burning paper filled the room, a funeral pyre for a mother's love. Hours later, the suffocating scent of burnt paper was replaced by the opulent perfume of orchids and lilac that filled the ground ballroom of the Zenith Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a diamond-like glow over the city's elite, all gathered for the jewel celebration. Jiang Wei's admission to the nation's top university and her official announcement as the heir to the Jiang Group. When she arrived, a hush fell over the crowd. Jiang Wei was a vision in a simple, but exquisitely tailored midnight blue silk gown that flowed around her like liquid night. Her posture was erect, her gaze steady, radiating a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. She moved not like a girl who had stumbled into fortune, but like a queen who had finally come home to her throne. Her first order of business was not to greet the dignitaries, but to speak with the hotel's event manager. There has been a change to the menu, she stated, a voice firm yet polite. The manager, a man accustomed to lavish requests, leaned in obsequiously. Of course, Miss Zhang. Whatever you wish. I want this to be the main appetizer, she said, placing a simple, rustic container on his silver tray. Inside were neatly arranged humble dried radish strips, the kind Colin used to make for her when they had little else to eat. Placed them on every table. Prominently, the manager blinked, utterly baffled. Ma'am, with all due respect, our Michelin star chefs have prepared a selection of this is peasant food. This, Jiang Wei corrected, her eyes unyielding, is a symbol of love and survival. It is the most important dish you will serve tonight. See to it. As the staff scurried to obey, Xu Jinga, adorned in glittering jewels that seemed to mock her inner ugliness, approached with her circle of sycophantic friends. Her eyes landed on Colin, who stood nervously by Wei's side in a clean but simple dress Wei had bought for her. Jinga's lip curled in disgust. My, she announced, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I didn't realize we were hosting a farmer's market. First, you try to pass off peasant food as couture cuisine, and now this. You can dress up a scarecrow, but it still smells of dirt. The circle of acquaintances tittered, their cruel laughter echoing the sounds from the hospital room. Colin shrank, her face flushing with shame, the memory of the burning photograph fresh and agonizing in her mind. But Jiang Wei did not flinch. She turned slowly, her gaze locking onto Chu Jinga. The noisy ballroom seemed to fade into the background, the world narrowing to the space between the two women. My mother's food fed me when I had nothing, Wei said, her voice level, cutting through the Snickers-like glass. Her love is more valuable than every diamond you're wearing. And as for my banquet, she took a deliberate step forward. Who are you to question the main dish at my event? Chu Jinga's face contorted with rage. Your event? My father is the head organizer. He's a senior director at Jiang Group. Who do you think you are? I'm Jiang Wei, she declared, her voice ringing with an authority that silenced the entire room. The sole heir to the Jiang Group, and you would do well to remember the name. Enraged and publicly humiliated, Chu Jinga's composure snapped. Her face was a mask of cold fury. You dare speak to me like that, you piece of gutter trash. She spun around, her voice shrill. Security, security, get this woman and her tramp mother out of my sight. Throw them out. Two burly guards in sharp black suits began to advance, their expressions impassive. The crowd gasped, parting to create an arena. Colin trembled, grabbing her daughter's arm in terror. But Jiang Wei stood her ground, unmoving, a solitary island of defiance. She placed a reassuring hand over her mother's, eyes fixed on the approaching guards, a silent storm gathering within her. The air in the grand banquet hall crackled with the static of impending violence. Security guards, their faces impassive and their shoulders broad, advanced on Jiang Wei. Xu Jinga watched with a venomous smirk, her moment of triumph at hand. She had cornered the little rat, trapping her with her peasant mother and their pathetic, stinking radish strips. The crowd murmured, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity, watching the humiliation unfold. Zhang and Li Meogan stood beside Xu Jinga, puffed up with vindictive pride, ready to see the girl who had defied them thrown out like trash. Jiang Wei stood her ground, her small frame a shield in front of Kulin's wheelchair. She braced herself, not against the guards, but against the familiar surge of despair. It was happening again. The world was closing in, ready to crush her. Stop! The voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute authority of a royal decree. Slicing through the din, it came from the main stage, where a man in a flawlessly tailored suit now stood, microphone in hand. The banquet's host. His face was pale. There seems to be a grave misunderstanding, he announced, his voice trembling slightly as it echoed through the hall. The guest of honor, the individual this entire banquet was arranged to welcome, has been grievously insulted. He took a deep breath, his eyes finding Jiang Wei in the crowd. Allow me to formally introduce the sole heir to the Jiang group, President Jiang's long-lost daughter Miss Jiang Wei. Silence. It was not a quiet lull but a deafening voice, as if every sound in the universe had been sucked out of the room. 100 pairs of eyes swiveled from the stage to the small woman in the simple dress. The name Jiang Wei hung in the air, a chandelier of glass and diamonds shattering the cheap plaster of their assumptions. Xu Jinga's smirk froze, then melted into a rictus of confusion. Jiang Wei, what nonsense is this? Her name is Li Mingyu. She's an orphan my uncle took in. Before she could spew any more venom, another figure cut through the paralyzed crowd. Secretary Wong moved with the lethal grace of a man who could end careers with a single phone call. He stopped directly in front of the security guards, his presence an impassable wall. Stand down, he commanded, his voice low and sharp. The guards flinched and immediately retreated. Wong then turned his cool, assessing gaze on Xu Jinga. Miss Chu, your baseless accusations and vulgar behavior toward the young miss of the Jiang family have been noted. I suggest you remain silent before you do irreparable damage to your family's business prospects. The threat was unmistakable. Xu Jinga's face, a canvas of disbelief, cycled rapidly through indignation and into pure, unadulterated terror. Li Meogan and Zhang looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. With the floor now hers, Jiang Wei finally spoke. Her voice was not the whisper of a victim, but the measured, clear cadence of a queen reclaiming her throne. She held up one of the dried radish strips, the very thing they had used to mock her. Xu Jinga accused me of bringing lowly food to this banquet to cause embarrassment, she began, her eyes scanning the silent, captivated audience. She is half right. I brought this, but it was not to embarrass anyone. She looked directly at Xu Jinga, her gaze piercing. This was a test, arranged by my father, President Jiang. These radish strips, prepared by the woman who raised me with love when I had nothing, were placed on every table. He wanted to see who in this room, full of wealth and power, possessed the character to appreciate simple sincerity. He wanted to see if his daughter still remembered the value of humility. She let a word settle. You, Xu Jinga, failed that test spectacularly. You didn't just insult me, you insulted the very values my father holds dear. You threw his trust, and his daughter's heart, onto the floor, as if summoned by her words. The grand double doors at the far end of the hall swung open. A palpable chill swept through the room, a change in atmospheric pressure that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. President Jiang did not enter a room. He consumed it. His presence was an event. His tailored suit like armor, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. His eyes, chips of obsidian that saw everything, swept across the scene. The scattered radish strips on the floor, the terrified faces of the Leos, his trusted secretary standing guard, and finally, his daughter, standing tall beside the frail woman in the wheelchair. He saw the full measure of the humiliation they had endured, and the stillness in his expression was more terrifying than any outburst. He walked forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. He stopped beside Jiang Wei, placing a firm, reassuring hand on her shoulder without taking his eyes off her tormentors. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the vast hall. It was a promise forged in ice and delivered with the force of an avalanche. Every single person, he began, his gaze slowly panning over Xu Jinga, Li Meogan and Zhang, who laid a hand on my daughter, who uttered a single word to humiliate her, or the woman who saved her life, will pay. Not with money, but with everything they hold dear. You wanted to ruin her. I will erase you. He turned slightly to his secretary. Wang, launch a full investigation into the Li family and the Zhu family. Every illegal transaction, every tax evasion, every crime they have ever committed. I want them to spend the rest of their miserable lives in a jail cell, contemplating their actions. Yes, President, Secretary Wang replied, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his eyes. Panic erupted. President Zhang, please, it was a misunderstanding. Li Meiogan blubbered, falling to his knees. Zhang was white as a sheet, mumbling incoherently. Xu Jinga, her arrogance shattered, began to wail. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Please, have mercy. Their pleas were meaningless no's. Security, now following a new, more powerful command, seized them. They were dragged away, kicking and screaming. Their public downfall a brutal, efficient spectacle. The last image the guests had was of Chu Jinga's tear-streaked, contorted face as she was hauled from the hall. The cacophony of the banquet dissolved into the hushed sanctity of a private suite at the Zhang family estate. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tasteful, opulent room where Kuala now rested. Fully recovered and safe, Chang Wei sat by her bed, gently holding her adoptive mother's hand. It's over, Mum, she whispered, her touch conveying a world of love and reassurance. They can never hurt you again. We're safe now. Kulin's eyes, clear and bright, filled with tears. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a pride so profound it ached. She squeezed her daughter's hand, her frail grip surprisingly strong. My Mingyu, she murmured, still using the name she'd always known. You were always so strong. Even when you thought you were small, you have such a good heart. Never lose that. Jiang Wei smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that finally reached her eyes. She looked out the window at the sprawling, manicured gardens of her new home. She was Jiang Wei, heir to an empire. She had wealth, status, and a father who would move mountains for her. But as she stood on the precipice of her powerful new life, she made a silent vow. She would build this future on a foundation of love, a fortress to protect the woman who had given her everything when she had nothing. Her past was not a stain to be washed away, but the bedrock of the formidable woman she had become.